I think it's possible that that old chestnut, that this group needs no introduction, could not be truer in this room. But nevertheless, it's my job to do so. President Vigdís, as is well known, is the first female elected head of state in the world, also the longest serving elected female head of state in the world, who broke many, many barriers and used this to advance women and men and the entire nation of which she was president. Before she got to that job, she was someone who made it exciting and a cultural phenomenon to study French via television. She ran the National Theater, and she won her first election not by a great deal, but all of the subsequent ones by very substantial margins, and became, if I might say so, a national institution almost, much beloved. We're also very fortunate to have here Gro Harlem Brundtland, who joined the Norwegian Labour Party at age 7, qualified as a doctor, worked in public health, was environment minister, then three times prime minister of Norway between 1981 and 1996, then director of the World Health Organization, now special envoy for the UN Secretary General on climate change, and deputy chair of the Elders, a group of former distinguished leaders and activists established by Nelson Mandela to promote peace, and Laura Ann Liswood, Secretary General of the Council of Women World Leaders, of which President Vigdís was a founding chair. She's also a senior advisor to Goldman Sachs. She's a lawyer. She has an MBA from Harvard. Her most recent book, The Loudest Duck, is an attempt to create and promote diversity in companies that's effective. She's been studying, writing about, and promoting the idea of female leadership for more than 20 years. Well, I hope we can have what will be a freewheeling conversation. Perhaps it's not the most intimate setting in which to have a freewheeling conversation, but I'm sure these women are perfectly capable of speaking their minds in a way that will get our attention. Because of the theme of this conference, I cannot help but ask the first question of President Vigdís and also Prime Minister Brundtland. Their own arrival at the top of their country's political systems marked a very important turning point, not just for the Nordic countries, but indeed for the world. And I wondered if they could reflect on your own personal experiences of that turning point in Nordic history, where women not only got to the top, but became heavily represented in politics. What were the issues that prompted this sea change that made it possible both for you to get to the top and for the changes that you then brought in your wake? President Vigdís, if you want to start.
Yes, as you all may know, we did something very special here in Iceland in 1975 when the United Nations declared that that year would be the Women's Year. And of course, the United Nations were thinking of the women of the world, not us in the Nordic countries. And the Icelandic ladies, they had for a long time thought that their places in parliament were not strong enough and their wages were not as good as men's. So they decided, and it was supposed to be in great silence and secrecy, to have a day off on the United Nations Day, the 24th of October.
And you don't call it a strike.
No. It was not a strike because they went to their bosses and asked whether they could have a leave of 2-3 hours in the afternoon to meet with the other girls in the town or in the villages. And they thought, everybody thought that the men didn't know about it, but they knew, of course they knew. So they said, of course, yes, you can go, my dear, of course you can go. So they united all over Iceland, in Reykjavik, thousands and thousands of women. It's absolutely unforgettable. And sang and made speeches and all that. And what nobody had realized that this day there was a standstill in the production of the country. The fist factories where women were working closed, the banks closed because women are are at the ground floor. Gentlemen bank directors at top floor. That has changed now. And so everything was closed, and we were there singing and having great fun and convincing not only us, but the whole people of the country that nobody could live without us. That was it. And that women were or are the pillars of society just as well as men.
And Prime Minister, would you say that your own arrival to the top job was a product of feminism in large part, or or did the fact that you became the Prime Minister then lead to a greater feminist consciousness?
Well, it was obviously both, because the Prime Minister Brundtland at that time, in 1974, so the year before 75, he called me to become Minister of Environment. And in his mind, he had to choose a woman, because a woman had died earlier that year, and he did not dare to have fewer women in his cabinet. However, we were only 4 at that time, so I was the number 4 being recruited, and he was looking for a woman. Now, only 8 months after that, I was elected to be the deputy leader of the Labour Party. Why? Because the sentiment was rising already within the Labour Party and other places in Norwegian society, that now there was time maybe to look at having women part of the leadership of the biggest party. So in April of 75, I was elected deputy leader. And I wouldn't have become Prime Minister 6 years later, if those processes hadn't happened. So it was part of a new kind of thinking, but it certainly was not something self-evident. I mean, the men in my party, when they realized that since the Prime Minister before me then, where I was part of the government, had been part of the government, when he was leaving, it was not obvious that the deputy leader of the party was going to be the next Prime Minister. So many men lined up and tried to think, Gro is the next leader, not now, but later. So clearly, it was not obvious. But there was a public, within the Labour Party, uprising. They started making decisions in the small party groups across the country when they knew that the new Prime Minister was going to be elected. And there was this wave of enthusiasm. They wanted me to be, the next Prime Minister. So there was a sentiment for change with regard to women in Norway and in my party in 1981 when this happened.
Does it matter to Jane, the healthcare worker or kindergarten teacher, that there is a female head of state or head of government? Does feminism in that way trickle down, set an example? How does it change lives on the ground?
You want me to answer?
Sure, go you first.
No, I am absolutely certain about it. And this you can know just because you have met so many girls, women, young women during your life who have precisely illustrated and come up and told me at what time they made a decision that I can do it when she can do it. So I am in no doubt at all that it has a great impact.
President Vigdís, you have other thoughts on this subject?
No,
You agree?
I am in great admiration for Gro for doing this, but I didn't finish my story. When you have large stories to tell, you never finish them. Anyhow, when it came to presidential elections in 1980, it was due to this day off in 75 that many of my countrymen couldn't see it otherwise than a woman should be among the candidates for the presidency. And suddenly my name was mentioned, and I was so very surprised because I was not as you used to this. I was in the theater and known through the television and radio and the mass media. And I was asked and asked and asked. I was pushed and pushed and pushed. And it's typical when I at last said, no, I can't do it. When I said, yes, I'll do it, because everybody said, we are behind you. Then I went home and vacuum cleaned the house. Spent the whole night to do that, politely waiting for my friends to wake up to tell them I cannot do this. And they said, it's too late, the journalists are coming in half an hour. And then the Carmen curlers, are very handy.
Did the two of you cooperate, trade tips, phone calls in the middle of the night? Hey, how do you do this? How do you do that?
For me, unfortunately not.
We didn't.
No, we didn't.
But this was not the time of emails and messages. It was really old days,
Yeah.
Yes, but
even telephoning from Iceland to Norway was not something daily.
Very unusual.
But we met, of course.
Yeah, we met,
but
of
that
course,
was,
yeah.
and that was great. But
that was later.
Yeah.
But you have organized to try to get women world leaders to be more numerous and also cooperate with each other. And it's a different, perhaps, thing now. The level of cooperation and amount of attention that support you give each other. And this is obviously something where Ms. Liswood is very much involved. Tell a little bit about how you did establish the Council of Women World Leaders and how it got going. And did you really mind that Margaret Thatcher wouldn't join? Do you want to start?
Okay, I'll start. But they were President Vigdis and Prime Minister Brundtland were the major pillars in the Council of Women World Leaders. The original sort of start of this was that I had one of those what I call in the shower questions. Generally speaking, they should stay in the shower. But this was what would it be like if we had a woman president in the United States? And since there was no one to ask that question of, and there still isn't, I did find out that there were 15 women living who were president or prime minister of their country at that point, or had been president or prime minister. So I thought perhaps I could meet one of these women leaders, having no idea why I thought I could meet a woman head of state, since I am not from CNN. And I've never asked anyone what kind of a tree they would be if they were a tree. I didn't have good interview skills.
We'll do that at the end.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jeff. Just gave you the idea, okay. But anyway, cut to the chase. After 18 months, I had in fact met all 15 of the world leaders. Not one of the world leaders turned me down for an interview. Margaret Thatcher did say, come back after you've met everyone else. So I'm pretty sure she didn't think I was coming back. But President Vigdis and Prime Minister Brundtland were one of the first two who supported that effort on my part. And then for me, what was happening was that these interviews with the world leaders were getting longer and longer and longer because I was telling them what the others had said in response to the questions that I gave them. In fact, a couple of prime ministers, I don't know if I ever shared this story with you, but a couple of prime ministers would say something to me about a problem they had, and I'd remember what President Vigdis and Prime Minister Brundtland said, and I'd say things like, oh, don't worry, Prime Minister so-and-so had the exact same problem. So it was a really interesting sort of dialogue at some point. So then I did ask them if they wanted to meet each other, and they agreed to do that. And with the support of President Vigdis and President Mary Robinson, we did have a summit of these world leaders. And almost all of them came. No, Margaret Thatcher did not come. She's not exactly what one would call a feminist. She did, Jeff, what I call take on the coloration of the species she was trying to invade. You'll figure that one out. So this summit happened. Both these leaders attended, and the council was created. President Vigdís graciously agreed, not knowing what she was agreeing to do, become the chair, but because this was the first one of these organizations, to do that. And so she was chair for a number of years, guiding the council in its growth and its activities. And now, under the chairmanship of Dalia Grybauskaitė, the president of Lithuania, there are 50 women presidents and prime ministers who are members. So if any of you are freely elected head of state or head of government, we will wait 3 months to make sure you stick, and then we will invite you to join the council.
And have you found this kind of organized group of women world leaders to make a difference to you? Or have you worked with them? How is it making a difference for them and for women's leadership that there is this organization? How does it work? And what examples do you have of the things that it's been able to accomplish that you've been proud of?
Shall I take that?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that we have at least organized 2 times or 3 times a gathering of ministers with speciality, and it started in that we gathered in Finland, Minister of Ecology and Environment, a group of women, very well organized and very useful, and we should do that again. And we were discussing that, Laura and I, that this should be done now when it's so actual, the environmental questions. And another one was in New York some years ago, when women finance ministers met, a number of women. Those 2 were the greatest successes. The others were smaller than, but these were large conventions, which proves that women are in increasing number in the finance, as finance ministers in governments.
And is there a sisterhood among senior ministers like this?
No more than amongst men, I think. Is there a brotherhood? May I ask this?
I believe people say so.
Well, I don't think that we feel like sisters. We feel like we feel like comrades, having the same aim, having the same ambitions, and even though we are perhaps politically not always agreeing with each other's opinion, we no more than men. We feel that it's necessary to meet, that women meet in the fields just as much as men.
Prime Minister, do you agree?
Yes, I think it's true that you have a potential to create new friendships in this way, which, as Vigdi says, this can happen between men who meet, and it certainly happens when women meet. You can learn from each other, and you get to know people who are in the same kind of situation, have the same kind of responsibilities, and you can learn from that. And sometimes this is across party lines, while as a social democrat, most of my attention has been spent on social democratic colleagues, whether they are women or men. But in addition to that, you can add the dimension of having contact with women leaders across different parties and countries. So it adds a new dimension.
I wonder if we can take the temperature a little bit about how things may have improved from when you got started. And I wondered if you could give examples of sexist behavior that you encountered when you were in power or at the start of your careers. And because those stories, I'm sure, evoke a certain time and place. Even in your exalted positions, perhaps you encountered such things. Do you continue to? Does anyone have the temerity any longer to treat you in an inferior way because you're a woman? And do you think that there has been progress generally in this sphere from what younger women and other people tell you?
Really?
Yeah, sure.
There has been a tremendous progress. I was extremely welcome in many countries, constantly invited. I think I joked about it at the time and saying they are so curious to see the phenomenon that has been elected. Anyhow, I was very warmly received and invited to official state visits in many countries. And I have to say that always respected, always talked to and respect with great respect. And sometimes I felt that gentlemen these politicians had a tendency to have confidence in me because they knew that a woman wouldn't tell the secrets. A colleague from abroad wouldn't tell the secrets because when you come from abroad, you do not discuss the politics of the country you're in. You come with a message from your own country. So that was, I came to that conclusion. Why did they confide in me? Because I wouldn't tell. Only comfort.
When you were, I'm sorry, when you were running for office originally, did you find that that there was old-fashioned attitudes that have now more or less disappeared or less prevalent in the country?
Good heavens, there's quite a lot of my countrymen were absolutely not used to this, and they found it very curious. And I had all kinds of remarks and such as, "Whom are you going to tell the secrets?" And since you do not have a husband, I was divorced at the time, and other old gentleman stood up and said, "I'm so grateful that you are not married with this," because then everybody would say that her husband has told her to say. That was these incredible attitudes. But on the other hand, seamen and farmers and intellectuals, they were all there, especially the seamen. And intellectuals and artists, of course. I came from an artistic surroundings. So, well, I was privileged, and I still am. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister, can you describe some of your earlier experiences and compare them to how things are going now, and whether this is a generally good sign?
Well, I think in 1981, when I had been Prime Minister from February until the election campaign in August, September, there was a misuse of the fact that I was a woman Prime Minister by conservative forces in my country. And they made stickers for cars. And now I'm going to say one little sentence in Norwegian, because some people here will probably get what it means. Bli kvitta. That means get rid of her, but the A, bli kvitt A, is the name of Arbeiderparti, my party. So it's a combination of this A, meaning her, and get rid of her, and my Labour Party, Social Democratic Party. So, but this would never happen now. So this, I think, we have left behind us, certainly in our countries, but it could happen many other places. We now have a second woman Prime Minister in Norway. She came into office in 1913, which means it's a third of a century after I entered in 81. There is nothing of this kind now. So clearly, the development over those 3 decades have changed the situation. Nobody would dare do anything of this kind, sexist, direct or indirect attacks now. So there is a maturation, a change, and it's really in the positive direction.
And what do you think are the biggest barriers that younger women face now, from your experience and what people are talking to you about?
One of the barriers they face in our countries is that they have started to take for granted that in our countries there is equality between boys and girls, men and women. So some of them relax too much and think that everything is done for good. So the danger for the young generation is that they don't learn their history, and that they think that everything that has been fought and won over the last 30, 40 years is there permanently, even without attention to it, even without discussing it, even without noticing that there may be still some things that are there among young people, but they just believe that they are equal because they've heard that we have gained equality, you know, in our countries. That's what worries me.
And you,
Yeah,
President?
I say the same thing. It is a tendency that young women think that liberty came as rain from heaven, that it hadn't to be fought for, or equal rights, I would like to say, and take it for granted. But it's not yet there. When there is not equal pay, it's not there, and that is really a ghost we have to fight now. This difference in salary, that is in all the Nordic countries. Women are somehow, I don't know how the society manages to have a difference in pay between men and women who are working at the same field, but it is there. But a tremendous lot has been gained, and I would say also that we mentioned that before in our discussion, that the confidence that women have in themselves, that has entirely changed.
Yes.
And
All for the good?
for the
Yes,
good,
yes.
for the good.
Even with images in the mass media that depict
Yeah,
them
yeah,
as being
definitely
sex
for the good,
objects, and
yeah.
I mean, in some ways, you could make the argument that there's been a backlash, reversals. You can see culturally that. I mean, I know from my own daughters and from the people who work for my firm, they feel that they're fighting kind of insidious cultural problems a lot. Maybe not the same political problems, but they don't feel that easy solidarity with the culture, in a way, and that it's hard for them to get their feet as women, given the onslaught of the mass media.
No, it's the fashion. It's
Yeah,
a fashion today to talk about role models, and it was a role model was not a word that was used in my time. We had actresses that had slim legs and things like that, was called role models. But now the girls of our countries definitely think of social persons who have made it, as they call it, as role models. And young women often come to me and say, thank you for being there. Because what they think, I read their minds. If she can, I can. And being a person that is not on a pedestal, because I'm working in the streets, not flying high in the sky. I am very grateful when girls come to me and say, "You are my role model." I can't but thank for that. You hear that? You must hear that quite often, also.
Yes, I think I said earlier that, you know, one of the things that are obvious feedbacks from younger people, younger girls and women, is what it has given them of faith in what is possible, that they have seen me and other women doing things that before only men did. So they know there is no difference with regard to what you in fact can do.
And also grow that we can cope with men.
Absolutely, yes.
That's a part of it.
Ms. Liswood, you have experience with business as well, and you're into many companies, and you get around a lot. What would you say are the biggest barriers that younger women are now facing?
Well, I do share the positive optimism of the leaders here, because I certainly have seen the changes. On the other hand, I think there's also the question of why so slow? Because I think for a lot of women who've been around doing this for a while, we've thought it would go faster. For example, the World Economic Forum's gender gap report, which I call them the Nordic nirvanas, the top countries, that the gender gap has closed, not completely, obviously, but closed substantially in the gap in health, not in every country, but in most countries. And it's closed, if not superseded, in education. In other words, that girls often have more education. So that gap is pretty well closing. The gaps that are not closing are the economic gaps and the political gaps across pretty much all countries in that sense. And so one of the premises was get them healthy, educate them, and then naturally the economic and political gaps would close. I think that was the underlying assumption around that. Well, there's nothing natural about it. Clearly there are some things in need of circuit breakers, because this change is not quite going as fast. In the businesses that I see that the young women you referenced, there's virtually no intake problem coming into organizations between men and women. There's an enormous upgrade problem. So the women come in at 50% and then of an organization, and then they're 3% of the CEOs. And so you have to say, well, where did they go? They didn't all go away to have families and children, and even the research shows that women with families are just as ambitious as men. So you have to say there are some dynamics that are going on. And as Pumzeli said, there's a lot more national policies in place, laws in place. But I think we're still facing some enormous cultural gaps, enormous belief structures, enormous unconscious beliefs, enormous archetypes. I'll give you an example, I think. This pertains to the United States, but I think it pertains here in Europe too. 16% of men in the United States are 6 feet or taller, 184 centimeters approximately. 56% of Fortune 500 male CEOs are 184 centimeters or taller, which is 4 times the cohort, right? Now, I've done a lot of research on leadership and interviewed a lot of leaders, written some books, and I've yet to see any research that correlates leadership ability and skeletal structure. But you get my point.
So President Vigdís talked about equal pay as being one of the important structural changes that she thinks attention needs to be paid to now. What would be the reforms most important that you would each like to institute to try to get over some of the barriers you were just mentioning? Perhaps in addition to equal pay, what else do you think would be most important to focus on?
That everybody takes it as for granted that women have the same brain as men. Fathers and brothers know that the daughters and the sisters are as clever as the brothers and the sons. Mm-hmm. And to accept that, and that's really a wish. And that girls stop feeling inferior to the brothers or men in general, because they are not.
But I'm sure that the generation that grew up when we did, many young girls of our age at that time grew up in families where the traditions made the parents treat their boys and girls differently. I know that I was lucky because in my case, my parents had deliberate views about this. They treated their children equally as much as they could. And they expected the same from me, the oldest, but also the only girl, that I had to go out and chop wood. My brothers had to do dishes. I was lucky to be brought up taking for granted that I could do the same as my brothers. And the interesting thing is, at the turn of the century, all the then women leaders of the United Nations system were invited to the UN headquarters, and we had a big meeting like this. And a moderator asked us questions. And it turned out that all of those women leaders who were sitting there answered the question about their own upbringing and their relationship to their father. All of us had had fathers who had taken for granted that we could, as girls, study, become educated, do exactly the same as their boys or their brothers. So I think we were 7 leaders on that table, and we could all say the same thing. Because, if your father treats the brothers differently, you get a bad start in life. Now, I hope it's better today, so that the children are growing up now, and I do think this is the case. They are treated more equally, expected more equally to perform and to do the same thing, to have careers, to do education. As you said, more women, in fact, are educated than men even now in the Scandinavian countries. So it has changed a lot, but it explains many things. And the tragedy is, across the world, on other continents, Africa, not least Asia, girls are still treated very different from their brothers. So for me, this is the big tragedy. How far away we are when we look at the global picture. Girls are given less food every day at the table because the boys and the fathers need the food first, should have based on cultural practices, and they are not given the chance to go to school, many of them, because they have to help their brothers pay for that schooling or to see that their brothers can get ahead. So we are very far away from something reasonable when you look globally at discrimination against women. It's overall everywhere. I'm sorry.
I think it's a very useful and important point to make.
Jeff, can I add something
please.
to that? Yeah, in terms of what I'm calling the circuit breakers or the bias interrupters and that kind of thing that I think we're looking at. I think that some of them are personal, as you were referencing, Gru, in the sense of women having confidence to stand up, to want to be leaders, et cetera. But a lot of it is institutional, and you get the increased gathering of gender disaggregated data is incredibly important, because policymakers can't make good decisions without gender disaggregated data. The challenge with that is, and I don't normally quote U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, not usually in my repertoire, but he had a notion of what he called the unknown knowns, which is that which we know and we pretend we don't know. Yeah. So in other words, the World Bank's knowledge that if you give $1 to a man, he'll, with all due respect, use it for consumable goods, put it nicely. If you give $1 to a woman, she's going to give it to help her family and healthcare and education, et cetera. But there's still policies in place that are giving the men this money, even though it's a known that we know these kinds of things. So I think the gender disaggregated data is essential. I think clearly leadership from both men and women is essential on this issue. But one of the biggest circuit breakers, and this is something that I know creates some controversy with people, is affirmative mechanisms. Pippa Norris of the Kennedy School says that no parliament has actually gotten to critical mass in its parliament without some form of affirmative mechanism in place. The Norwegians were certainly, and again, some controversy, but the Norwegians has this law, and many of you will know it, that 40% of corporate board seats must be of the opposite gender, which, of course, there were so few women, it means 40% women. And if the public corporation doesn't get 40% women, it can be delisted from the Norwegian Stock Exchange and dissolved. So what was, of course, fascinating about that was they couldn't find any qualified women before the law. It's amazing how quickly they found the qualified women after the law. But the point is that there's now research, because this is the longest running affirmative mechanism. And there's now research that's actually showing with a critical mass of O's in a room full of X's that board governance processes are changing. So we're getting all of this research. And incidentally, some of the changes are that women read the board materials. You know, what can I tell you? But now men are coming to the board having read the board materials, which tells you that in the face of the non-dominant group, the dominant group's performance changes. That's what that says. That men look at short-term thinking, women look at long-term thinking tendency. But the best boards look at short-term and long-term. Men tend to look at shareholder impact, women have a tendency to look at stakeholder impact. Employees, environments, communities. Best boards look at shareholder and stakeholder. So it's a really interesting controlled experiment on what happens when you do have a critical mass of O's in a room full of X's. But it didn't get there without some affirmative mechanism in place, because the culture shift would be so slow to get to that critical mass that governments have decided that they need some sort of mechanism to create the kind of change that's really going to make the big differences. And I think, you know, if we have to look honestly, we have to say, what are those kind of major ways to shape cultures?
Thank you. In 2 sentences or less, do you have a particular policy reform? Like she talked about quotas as a way of trying to push things along. You talked about a way of getting men to treat their daughters better or more equally. In the Nordic countries, would that be trying to require that men take, for instance, the same amount of leave as the mothers at the birth of the children? What specific reforms would you think would be the most important in the developed countries to move things along?
Let me say that parental leave, we used to call it pregnancy leave, now we call it parental leave. That early 90s, we started introducing part of that parental leave to go to the fathers. That was seen to be radical. People were protesting that we were entering into, you know, people's choice. They should be able to choose for themselves, etc. We did it. And now, when we had a change of government 2 years ago, the proposal from the Social Democratic government was to increase the 10 weeks, which is the rule today, to 14 weeks. Now, there are 2 important aspects of this. It should be continued forward so that men have a bigger part of the parental leave, because they need to learn to be fathers early in the child's life. You know, how can we change attitudes in society about a balance in life between work and family life unless we let the men enter into that scenario very early? Now, the new government took out those 4 weeks, so we stay at 10 now. But again, it shows me that you need to have social reforms that push the issues. Now, the other important, I mentioned fathers being with their children, learning from the beginning about their children, and taking responsibility as the mothers do. But the other important issue is when an employee meets an employer, of course there has now been a change. An employer cannot take for granted that a young man or a 40-year-old man in front of them who is applying for some position will not next year have parental leave. Just like they have been watching women over time. Oh, this is dangerous. She may get pregnant and she may get, you know, have to be on leave next year. Now, even the men can be on leave. It equalizes more than before the relationship in the labor market, so that women are not so much discriminated against as before. So this should move forward even further. Not, I think, to the absolute equal level, because after all, women are giving, are dieting their babies, nursing their babies, and they are carrying their pregnancy. But certainly, if you have at least a third of the parental period for the men, and 2/3 that they can choose, if they want to share it equally, fine. But you need to have more than 10 weeks when you have a whole year that is left to be for the men. So we still have reforms that can be made to improve the situation further.
President Vigdís, do you have a particular reform that you would also like to see?
No, I quite agree with Gro. I have nothing more to say. She said it so well, thank you.
In this question, I'm going to pick on the Prime Minister a little, but I'd then like to broaden out the question to all of you. When I read your autobiography, I was extremely impressed by the culture of solidarity that you talked about in your youth, and which I think got imported into your premiership, the sense that what has become known as the kind of Nordic model of social cohesion, government support, people feeling more connected, a virtuous circle of things kind of getting better over time. And in your lifetime, the Brundtland report leading to the first Earth Summit and great progress from the World Health Organization. And in your book, you also mention your sense of relief when the Oslo Accords were signed, or in your presence, helped by Norway and your own good offices. And you look at the world now and you wonder, are things getting better in quite the same way? The Middle East we can start with. It's hard to see a two-state solution coming into being anytime soon. You see the global warming proceeding apace. You see even in a country such as Norway, which has fantastic social cohesion, even if Anders Breivik may be a crazy person, still he drew on strains of nativism and extremism that still have a place in the culture, perhaps in a way that they didn't before. And so was the period in which you were in power a kind of lucky, maybe not accident, but a lucky period, a fortunate period? Are we going backwards? Are there particular problems that are gaining strength that have you worried? So, and if my list of problems isn't convincing to you, what do you consider to be the big problems? And what makes you most enthusiastic and optimistic too? So since I directed at you, you can start.
So in 1987, the report, Our Common Future, came from the commission that I led on the world, on the environment and development. And that is one of the references you made. Meanwhile, from 87, when we coined the concept sustainable development, that has to be the future of the world, we addressed climate change, and we analyzed and wrote about what needed to be done to avoid the catastrophes that otherwise will be coming. Now, then you can say that in the 90s, well, first of all, we had Rio in 92. In the 90s, things were moving forward based on that report. And then there were backlashes. Financial crisis, budgetary difficulties, people were, leaving a little aside the necessity. So, but now when I still can have my optimism there, is that here in this year 2015, the world has been able to agree on sustainable development goals. It has taken all the time from 87 to 2015. But so in the end, then I look at history, I say, these are radical changes that have to be made. And the world has decided now, agreed on 17 goals for sustainable development. And when you read them, those goals were absolutely not possible to have leaders of the world agree on in 2000, 15 years ago. And so for me, this means, although there are many difficulties, the world is still moving forward in its wisdom in many crucial areas. And even if we will not get a fantastic agreement in Paris in December on climate, we will get an agreement. So things are moving forward. By the way, the Oslo Accords, calling for a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine, is still the only answer. I agree with you that it doesn't look good, but nobody has come up with an alternative to that solution that will create a basis for peaceful development between Israel and Palestine. So, you know, it's not necessarily so that even if it has taken from 93 to 2015, it can never happen. I don't see a solution to the Middle East crisis between the two, which is not giving each of them their own state. There's no way. Either Israel is going to be flooded by Palestinian voters in a one-state solution, and Israel will feel completely overwhelmed, you know, losing their Jewishness and everything, or the other way, you know, it just doesn't work. There's no other. Now, of course, the difficulties in the broader Middle East, with Syria now on everybody's minds, and with years and years, with Kofi Annan and others trying to find a political solution, and it is not happening. It shows that our world leaders have not been able to do what is necessary to help solve a crisis like this. And there are many of those, but Syria is the most acute one. And the US and the Soviet Union, or the Russia, sorry, it's not a coincidence that I made a mistake now, because they are somehow backlashing, you know. However, when you have the Security Council permanent members not able to agree on world action and world common cause about a crisis, a tragedy like Syria, yes, you are right to ask critical questions, but I still see no alternative route ahead than improving collaboration, responsibility, and working and strengthening our international institutions.
Although that's the optimistic and perhaps that's a solution. And of course, you are that kind of a person who wants to make good things happen. But the chaos might be the alternative, and sometimes there are signs of that. I'm sorry, President.
Yeah, I would like to put one question to Grove, please. Do you think, Grove, that things would be better if more women were at the table?
I do.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And another question: how do we create that? How do we support that at a conference here in Iceland on women's issues? What can we do? What is the message that we are sending now to all these ladies who come here and the gentlemen who are here?
Yeah.
What is the message of this conference?
Yeah, you know, in addition to all the principles that are in our Charter of Human Rights, are in all our work towards equality between men and women. It's something that you mentioned a little earlier, and which is now strongly present in the Sustainable Development Goals. The empowerment of women in the economy with regard to property rights, inheritance, everything that affects women's capacity, roles, etc., in countries which are not like the Nordic ones. And those countries are most of the countries of the world where things need to change. But these countries need to understand that without full woman participation in their societies, they are losing out economically. Nothing speaks louder than that to men. And there are most men out there who need to understand, if we keep our women down, we are losing out also economically. And this is something, and it was possible during the discussions on the Sustainable Development Goals, to have all these different countries agree to put these economic factors also linked up with women empowerment It is not only a question of human rights or the rights of women, it is to the benefit of society and the world, also economically.
Unfortunately, our time is almost up, so in order not to ask the question of what kind of tree you would be, I have a final question for each of you, a three-part question. The reason I'm inspired to ask it is that I turned 60 this year. I realize I'm not quite as young as I would like to be, and I've been perhaps thinking ahead as a result. And so, three questions on that line. Number one, what have you done that has made you the proudest? Number two, what is your biggest failure? Number three, what would you like people to say about you when you're gone? Well, that's not fair, so why don't we start with you, Laura?
Oh, thanks.
We'll end with President Vigdís.
Gosh. Let's think about that for a minute. Obviously very proud of whatever role I've been able to play in advancing women and perhaps putting words to things. I guess I'd like it sort of to end by saying, well, she did help hurry history, move things along a bit. I think failures are all the things that you wish you had done, the things that you wished you had stepped up to with this. I mean, I think part of the challenge is that we have a tendency to think because progress is certain, that social progress is certain, when in fact we can go back to the Middle Ages, as seen in some societies. So I think that sort of how do we each of us keep ourselves sort of energized and enthusiastic and optimistic like the Prime Minister is. I do have this belief that women are like snowflakes. One alone may melt, but together we can stop traffic.
That's a lovely epitaph. Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think I am happy that I have been able to make some difference in my own country, Norway, and to the world in working on the World Commission on Environment and Development and having people, 23 people from different parts of the world, different religious and other backgrounds, come together to have a unanimous report about the future of the world back in 1987. Of course, also the work in the World Health Organization in many ways was a follow-up to this. Health is crucial at the political level. It should not be left to health ministers, who often are the far down the table in any government. This is the responsibility of the leaders of countries, health and education. And so, there's a long line of working to improve women's situation, women's roles, and the social causes that are linked to health, development, and to a better world for all, peace, and now taking care of the environment in a fully responsible way, which is what is leading us up to Paris this December. Now, failures, I think everything that we as societies have not been able to achieve, and I mentioned some of it earlier, all the women across so many countries of the world who are being discriminated against in a way that is absolutely unacceptable. To me, this is our common failure, but since I haven't been able to change the world more than I have, it's also my failure. Yeah.
And what would you like people to say about you when you're gone? What your epitaph?
That I think people will have to decide based on their judgment, not mine. Yeah.
And President?
Yeah, what I have been proudest of is actually having given the women of a whole country, cross parties and wherever, confidence in that they have a saying in society. I know I have that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had a celebratory seminar in honor of Madam Vigdísi Finnbogadóttir, for which I thank you most sincerely. Most sincerely. Thank you, thank you. And I'm so very proud that I think I woke up the Icelanders that for reforestation. And they are planting trees all around the country.
Yeah.
And when I came first with my 3 trees, what is this lady? The left journalist was laughing. Of course, a woman with trees. What is she going with these 3 trees? One for the boys, one for the girls, and one for the future generations. And they had the boys. I knew that they wanted to look after something that they were theirs. So they looked after their trees, the boys for the girls, and the third one was for the future generation that they would have together. And all the parents were kind of smiling there around. I was very grateful for that. And now we have reached the green in this country that is, we can be proud of in the climate change. My failures, I have buried them all, so I won't mention them. But I knew that you were going to ask this question, so I'll give you my answer through the old Edda, the old Snorri's Edda. There is an epitaph there, 1,000 years old, from a saying of the High One. And he says in Icelandic, Þeir fé deyja frændur, þeir sjálfur hið sama, en orðstír deyr aldrei, hveim sér góður getur. And I found an English translation to that. Cattle die, kinsmen die, thyself must die too. But the good name never dies of one who has done well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.